Chapter 4. The Alley with No Escape. The day I truly tasted Istanbul's underbelly started with a simple errand. Bekir had asked me to pick up some fabric samples from a supplier a few blocks away from the shop in Lulu. The air was muggy, the sky overcast. Zara was busy handling customers, so I set off alone, weaving through the throngs of women lugging enormous bags of clothing for export. After days of claustrophobia in the shop, it felt almost freeing to step outside for a short walk. I clutched the slip of paper with the supplier's address, scanning the messy street signs and listening to the swirl of languages: Turkish, Russian, Arabic. My boots clicked on the cracked pavement. A vendor yelled out prices for leather jackets. Across the way, a coffee shop buzzed with men in heated discussion. I reached the intersection where I was supposed to turn. The supplier was located in a maze of side streets, or so Bekir had warned. I followed the numbers on buildings, passing a row of shuttered shops with metal grates. The route got quieter, foot traffic thinning out. My heart fluttered with a familiar anxiety. This part of Lulu felt different, as if the city's hustle dropped away, revealing something raw. After a few more paces, I realized I had missed the correct street. The building numbers did not match. Irritated, I turned around, stepping into a narrow alley that smelled of rotting produce and something sour. A flash of graffiti on the walls depicted stylized letters I could not decipher. A single flickering overhead light cast a sickly glow. I quickened my pace, hugging the alley's left side, ignoring a vague sense of being watched. Step by step, the air grew heavier, as if anticipating a storm. I spotted a figure at the far end of the alley, hunched, wearing a dark jacket. My palms dampened. I cursed myself for taking a risk, but there was no turning back, unless I wanted to retrace several blocks. It's broad daylight, I told myself. You're being paranoid. Still, my instincts prickled. I slowed, considering if I should turn around and find a busier street. But the man was already shifting, glancing over his shoulder. I tried to appear casual, looking away. I was halfway down the alley when I heard footsteps behind me, a second figure. My pulse quickened. My mind screamed, "This is a trap." Yet I kept moving, breath shallow. My footsteps echoed off the damp walls. Then a voice hissed in Turkish, "Kizim dur." "Girl, stop." Panic seized me. I whipped my head back, spotting a thin guy with a shaved head, eyes glittering under the flickering lamp. He was maybe in his 20s, face twisted in a mocking grin. My mind raced. Run or stand your ground. The man ahead had turned fully now, blocking the alley's exit. The one behind me sidled closer. My fingers trembled. They were corralling me in, like a cat cornering a mouse. I forced out a shaky question in Turkish.
"Ne istiyorsunuz?"
"What do you want?" They chuckled. The one behind me said something too fast for me to catch. The one in front clarified in rough Russian, "Why you alone, Devushka? Not safe. Maybe we help you." Their snickering told me exactly how they meant to help. My instincts roared. I dropped the slip of paper with the address, spun on my heel, and sprinted back the way I had come. Fear lent me speed, but the alley was slippery puddles of something foul, uneven pavement. I skidded, nearly losing my balance. Behind me, I heard their voices rising, footsteps smacking the ground in pursuit. They were chasing me, adrenaline spiked so hard I tasted metal in my mouth. My boots pounded the alley floor, echoing in a staccato of panic. Faster, faster, I told myself, heart hammering. If I could just reach the busier street, maybe the crowd would protect me. But the men were closing in. One of them barked a curse. I saw a corner ahead. Without thinking, I swung left, hoping it led to an exit. Instead, I ran into a dead end, a stone wall towering in front of me. My shoes scraped on wet concrete as I skidded to a stop. My breath caught in my throat. In a heartbeat, I spun back, desperate to find any other route. But the two men were there, blocking the only way out. One was tall and lean, the other short but stocky, his fists balled. They advanced slowly, like they had all the time in the world. "Please," I gasped in Russian. "I don't have money." One of them sneered. "Maybe we don't want money." My stomach twisted. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, glancing frantically at anything to use as a weapon. There was a pile of broken crates near the corner. My heart pounded so loud I could barely think. The taller man stepped forward first, hands raised in a half-taunting gesture. "Don't be scared," he murmured, voice dripping false sympathy. "We'll have a little fun." The other man circled to my left, blocking me from the crates. My mind flashed to every horror story I had heard about girls disappearing. I had no illusions. No one was coming to save me. If I screamed, would anyone hear? Would they care? The taller man lunged, grabbing my arm. A jolt of terror propelled me into action. I swung my free hand, nails scraping his face. He yowled, staggering back. The shorter man cursed, moving in. I managed to twist away from the second man, stumbling over debris on the ground. My foot caught on a loose board, and I nearly fell. He seized my sweater, yanking me backward. I felt the fabric tear at the shoulder. Blind panic took over. I kicked out, hearing a grunt as my boot connected with something, maybe his shin. The taller man, face scratched, charged again. He aimed a punch at my midsection, and I doubled over, gasping. Pain flared in my ribs. In that moment, the second man tried to clamp a hand over my mouth, but I twisted my head, biting down on his fingers. He screamed, releasing me. Tears blurred my vision, but adrenaline kept me fighting. I reached for a broken crate, grabbed a jagged piece of wood. With all my strength, I swung it wildly, the edge catching the taller man's shoulder. He roared, stumbling back. Heart thundering, I seized that moment to dart past him. It was pure luck that my blow distracted them enough for me to squeeze by. My side ached from his punch. My legs felt like jelly, but I ran. I raced down the alley, ignoring the protest of my lungs. Voices followed, though more distant. I dared not look back, focusing on the labyrinth of side streets. Light flooded the next intersection, and I burst onto a moderately busy road, nearly colliding with a man carrying a stack of boxes. He shouted at me in Turkish, startled. Panting, I scanned behind me, expecting the two attackers to appear. They did not. Perhaps they did not want witnesses, or maybe I'd just outrun them. My chest was on fire, panic still coursing. Clutching my torn sweater, I weaved through the startled crowd. A few people glanced at my disheveled state, but nobody stopped me or asked if I was okay. Typical Istanbul, nobody wants trouble. I found a narrow side street with enough pedestrians to feel safer. I slumped against a wall, struggling for breath, tears slipping down my cheeks. My ribs throbbed where he had struck me. My arms shook violently. Over and over, I replayed the image of those men cornering me. The stench of that alley, their predatory grins, how close I came to. I could not finish the thought. My mind skittered away, refusing to articulate what might have happened if I had not fought back. Eventually, I realized I had to return to the shop. My errands were forgotten. I had no clue where the supplier's building was now. I barely cared. I just needed to see Zara, to tell someone, to calm down. Keeping to the busier streets, I retraced my path. My eyes darted constantly, searching for any sign of those men. My sweater hung off one shoulder, the sleeve torn. My hair was a tangled mess. I felt as though every step could be my last if they reappeared. By the time I reached the shop, my legs wobbled so badly I nearly collapsed at the entrance. Zara was at the counter, sorting receipts. She looked up, alarm widening her eyes. "Good God, Inna," she gasped, rushing over. What happened? I could not even speak, just shook my head, tears threatening again. Bekir emerged from the back, frowning. He glanced at my torn clothes, the bruises forming on my arms. "What did you do?" he demanded, as though I had caused trouble on purpose. I swallowed hard, managing to stammer. "Two men, in an alley, Then my voice broke. Bekir rubbed his temples. "We can't have this here," he muttered, gesturing for Zara to take me into the back room. "Customers will be scared off. Sort her out." In the cramped back room, Zara helped me sit on a rickety stool. She handed me a bottle of water, then carefully pulled my torn sweater aside to see if I was hurt. My ribs screamed at her touch, but I bit back a cry. "Jesus," she whispered. "They really did a number on you." Did they? She let the question hang, uncertain if I had been assaulted sexually. I shook my head vehemently, tears rolling. No, I got away. She exhaled shakily, relief flooding her expression. Thank God. You need to be more careful. Laleli's not safe, especially in the alleys. I nodded, hugging myself, the shock making me tremble. She placed an arm around my shoulders, and I found myself leaning into her, letting out small gasps of sobs. A few minutes later, Bekir barged in, eyebrows knotted. What happened exactly? He demanded. Zara narrowed her eyes. She was attacked, Bekir. Isn't that obvious? He shot me a look, almost accusatory. You picked some fight with the wrong guys? My mouth fell open, offended. Are you serious? You sent me out alone. I took a wrong turn and they cornered me. He grunted, crossing his arms. This neighborhood is rough. You should have been more cautious. Anger flared in me, battling my tears. You think I wanted this? He waved a dismissive hand. It is not about what you wanted. It is about being smart, girl. Now clean up and get back out front if you can. We have customers. I stared in disbelief. This was a new low. I had nearly been raped, and all he cared about was business. Zara bristled, rising to her feet. She can barely stand, Bekir. Bekir rolled his eyes, then pulled some bills from his pocket, thrusting them at me. Go buy a new sweater down the street. That one is ruined. And wash your face. Customers do not want to see tears. My shaking hands did not move to take the money. Part of me wanted to slap it away. But Zara nudged me, her gaze saying, just do it for now. So, I snatched the bills, ignoring the humiliation burning in my gut. Zara led me to a nearby shop, where I bought a cheap blouse that fit poorly. I changed in a cramped storage area, wincing every time fabric brushed my bruised ribs. I splashed water on my face, dried with paper towels. My reflection in the mirror looked haunted, eyes ringed and red. Zara tried to reassure me. At least you're safe now. But I did not feel safe. I felt violated by the mere thought that men could so easily corner me. I felt disgusted by Bekir's reaction, and a roiling anger at the city, at the family I lived with, at everything. I could not focus on work after that. My hands shook whenever a male customer came near. Zara stepped in, letting me handle minor tasks like sorting inventory in the back. Bekir eventually relented, letting me leave an hour before closing. Walking to the bus stop, I kept to the most crowded streets I could find. My heart pounded at every passing face. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to hide in a locked room and never see Istanbul again. When I finally got home, the older women in the apartment barely acknowledged me. My mother's boyfriend was nowhere to be seen. My mother noticed the ill-fitting blouse, raised an eyebrow. Where's your sweater? At first, I did not speak. Then I blurted out the attack in a rush of words. Her face went white. She clasped a hand over her mouth, tears welling. You're hurt? She whispered, searching me for injuries. My chest tightened, tears threatening again. I am okay. I fought them off. She pulled me into a trembling hug. For a moment, it felt like I had my real mother back, the one who would slay dragons to protect me. But the moment ended too quickly. Because then she asked in a quivering voice, Did he find out about it? Is he mad? I stiffened, realizing he meant the man who claimed to care for us. That was her worry, that my near assault would anger him, that it would reflect poorly on his image or create inconvenience. My heart sank further. She guided me to our room, trying to examine my bruises. I let her fuss, applying a cold compress made from a plastic bag filled with ice. My ribs felt tender, but I did not think anything was broken. I confided in her. I was so scared. I thought they were going to. My voice cracked. She cupped my cheek. I'm so sorry. But behind her, sorrow lurked that same helpless acceptance. We had no one to turn to. No father, no local friends, no resources. She whispered, if we had more money, we could live in a safer neighborhood. Maybe one day. Rage flickered in me again. One day, that is all she ever said. But each day in this city chipped at my sanity. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that stone wall, that corner, those hungry eyes. My ribs throbbed like a bruise pulsing in tandem with my heartbeat. I heard the family's TV blaring in the other room. Sometimes I would catch the older women's laughter. I seethed at how normal their lives seemed while mine was unraveling. In the darkness, I realized something crucial. There was no safety net in Istanbul for girls like me. If a random alley could trap me so easily, what else lurked in the shadows? And if the man owning my mother decided to push me further, who would stop him? The next morning, I trudged back to the shop, ignoring the ache in my side. Bakir barely glanced at me, pointing me to the coat racks. I complied, sorting and folding. After a few hours, Zara pulled me aside, voice hushed. "Are you okay? Really?" I swallowed. "Not really. I keep seeing their faces." She placed a gentle hand on my forearm. "I know. Listen, you need to watch your back. If you ever need to go somewhere, get me. We will go together." Her offer was the closest thing to genuine kindness I had encountered, besides my mother's half-broken attempts. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "Thank you." She frowned at the bruise visible on my collarbone. "You should wear a scarf. Customers do not like seeing that." An ironic laugh escaped me. Right. My pain is an inconvenience to business. But I did as she suggested, wrapping a scarf around my neck. Days passed, but the memory of that alley never left me. It seeped into my dreams. I would jerk awake, sweating, convinced I heard footsteps closing in. My mother tried her best to reassure me, though her own bruises told me she had troubles enough. Sometimes on the bus, I would stare at other girls who looked as lost as I felt. I wondered if they too had taken a wrong turn and glimpsed the city's fangs. Istanbul might have glimmering mosques and bright bazaars for the tourists, but for us, it had labyrinths of despair. I confided in no one else. Telling Bekir or the family again felt pointless. They would brush it off or blame me. Telling the police was laughable, considering my shaky status here. Even if I did find an officer who spoke Russian or English, what would I say? That I wandered into a dark alley and men attacked me? The city chews up such stories daily. I realized the cold truth. No one escapes a city like this without scars, physical or emotional. Mine happened to be both. Despite my fear, I forced myself to keep walking the streets. Not that alley, never again, but I refused to let the trauma chain me to that miserable apartment. Some nights I would wander near the water if I could muster the courage, letting the sea air sting my cheeks. Each step was an act of defiance, a statement that I was still alive despite the city's attempts to break me. Sure, I trembled whenever a strange man stepped too close. My pulse spiked at the sound of footsteps behind me, but I vowed not to let fear swallow me whole. This vow was fragile, held together by a thread. But it was something. That alley showed me how quickly life can close in, how you can lose control in seconds. It taught me to weigh every decision, like which route to take, who to trust. I hated that lesson, hated the men who taught it to me. But it was hammered into my bones now, an unwanted brand. I never told my mother the graphic details. She had enough burdens. I gave her the short version. I escaped. I'm mostly okay. I just hurt my side. Maybe I spared her the full horror so she would not blame herself. Because in her mind, everything that happened to me was her responsibility. She had brought me here after all. But deep down, I carried the memory alone, etched into my psyche. Istanbul had shown me no mercy that day. And I knew from that point on, I had to be my own shield because no one else was going to shield me.